It was just past midnight when the calm surrounding Gatcombe Park shattered. A faint breeze stirred the treetops, the estate bathed in soft silver light from a waning moon. All seemed peaceful, the kind of silence that only exists deep in the English countryside. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But then, somewhere beyond the manicured lawns and ancient oaks, came the sound, metal scraping against stone, a sound too deliberate to be ignored. Within seconds, the serenity of Princess Anne's private residence was replaced by chaos, alarms, and the desperate crackle of security radios. News broke within minutes. Buckingham Palace confirmed that Princess Anne had been involved in what officials described as a late-night security incident. Those few words, delivered in the clipped calm of an official statement, sent ripples through Britain and beyond. But behind the composed tone of royal communication, something far more alarming was unfolding. Multiple sources close to the palace now claim that during the rush to secure her safety, Princess Anne fell, striking her face as she was being hurried from danger. Imagine the confusion of that night. Flashing blue lights bouncing off the palace gates, guards sprinting across the grounds, and the hum of helicopters above as emergency teams were called in. Eyewitnesses describe shouting from within the estate, followed by moments of eerie silence. For many Britons, waking up to the news felt like déjà vu, a chilling reminder that even within the walls of royalty, security is never absolute. Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, has long been regarded as one of the hardest-working and most resilient members of the royal family. Known for her independence, her no-nonsense attitude, and her refusal to be defined by glamour, she has earned both respect and affection across the United Kingdom. For decades, she's attended countless engagements without complaint, representing the monarchy with stoic grace, while others attracted the headlines. To hear that she was injured inside her own home felt not only shocking but deeply personal. In the first few hours after the breach, information was scarce. Officials refused to elaborate beyond the phrase minor injuries, but insiders tell a different story. One palace source claimed the situation could have been catastrophic had the intruder reached the main residence. Another hinted that security teams were caught off guard by what seemed to be a carefully timed intrusion. Still, the most haunting question remains: who managed to breach one of the most heavily guarded royal estates in the country? There's something unsettling about imagining the vulnerability of someone like Princess Anne. For years, she's been seen as the strong one, the royal who rarely flinches, who rides horses in the rain, who shrugs off tabloid gossip. The daughter of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, and has lived through tragedy, scandal, and relentless public scrutiny. Yet, she's endured it all with an unshakable sense of duty. To think of her stumbling in the dark, surrounded by chaos and fear, is to glimpse a rare moment of fragility behind the walls of royal power. As dawn broke over Gloucestershire, police officers remained stationed around Gatcombe Park. Reporters began to gather at the gates, their cameras trained on the long drive leading to the main house. The Royal Protection Squad, typically invisible to the public, was suddenly on full alert. Helicopters circled the perimeter, scanning the estate's boundaries. For the first time in years, the words security failure and royal residence appeared side by side in national headlines. But this wasn't the first time Princess Anne had faced danger within the safety of royal walls. Decades ago, she survived a kidnapping attempt on the Mall, showing the same courage that earned her public admiration. Back then, when asked if the experience frightened her, she famously replied, "Not particularly." That single remark cemented her reputation as the unshakable royal. Yet, tonight's events tested that image in ways no one could have anticipated. Those close to and say that she initially resisted being taken to the hospital. She reportedly told medics she was fine and insisted on walking unaided. But after persuasion from her security team, she was escorted for a precautionary evaluation. While palace officials maintain that her injuries were not life-threatening, sources describe visible facial bruising and swelling, evidence of just how quickly the situation spiraled out of control. The question now being whispered through corridors of power is not just how the breach occurred, but why. Was it a random act of trespassing? A deliberate attempt to send a message? Or something more sinister involving someone with inside knowledge of palace security protocols? Authorities have launched a full-scale investigation, but details remain tightly guarded. Scotland Yard officials have declined to comment beyond acknowledging the arrest of one individual near the vicinity of the residence. Meanwhile, royal watchers across the world are piecing together clues, analyzing the timing, the location, and the official silence. The palace's measured response, neither confirming nor denying certain details, has only fueled speculation. Was the intruder after valuables, confidential documents, or was it a targeted act of intimidation? In the age of constant surveillance and sophisticated technology, it seems almost impossible that such a breach could happen. Gatcombe Park, after all, is protected by an intricate network of cameras, motion sensors, and armed guards. For someone to have slipped through those defenses raises uncomfortable questions about the effectiveness of royal security. More troubling still, some insiders suggest the system may have been tampered with before the incident occurred. As the story spread through social media, the public reaction was immediate and emotional. Thousands of messages flooded online platforms expressing concern for Princess Anne's well-being. "She's the nation's rock," one user wrote. "If something happens to her, it's like losing part of Britain's backbone." Others demanded accountability, urging the government to review royal security budgets. Even international outlets, from CNN to Le Figaro, carried breaking headlines about the shocking breach at Princess Anne's estate. Behind the official statements, the human side of the story quietly unfolded. Staff members who had worked for and for years reportedly broke down in tears after the incident. Many of them see her not just as a royal but as family, a woman who remembers their birthdays, greets them by name, and insists on doing things herself. One longtime gardener was overheard telling a reporter, "She's the last person who deserves this. She's always looked out for us." Even those inside Buckingham Palace were shaken. According to one insider, the king was informed of the breach within minutes. Sources claim he immediately contacted Anne's private secretary, demanding updates by the hour. "Charles was deeply distressed," the insider said. "He knows his sister's toughness, but he also knows she's not invincible." In a rare display of vulnerability, Queen Camilla reportedly canceled her scheduled engagements the following morning. The royal family, often criticized for emotional reserve, appeared united in quiet worry. For once, the tabloids refrained from gossip. The tone across media was respectful, even reverent. After all, this was not about politics or controversy. It was about safety, family, and fragility. The irony wasn't lost on the British public. Princess Anne, the royal most admired for her independence, was suddenly the victim of circumstances beyond her control. Her life, defined by discipline and duty, had collided with a moment of pure unpredictability. In that sense, her story mirrored something larger, a symbol of how even the most secure and structured lives can unravel in an instant. As evening approached on the following day, palace gates remained closed to the press. A single statement from Kensington officials reassured the public that Her Royal Highness is recovering well and remains in good spirits. But for those who understand the coded language of palace communications, that phrase, good spirits, often conceals more than it reveals. In pubs and living rooms across the country, conversations lingered on one shared question: what really happened inside those grounds? There are rumors of a shadowed figure seen on security footage moments before the alarms sounded. Others claim the breach was a diversion for something bigger, a test run, perhaps probing weaknesses in royal defense systems. For now, those theories remain unconfirmed, but their persistence speaks volumes about public unease. And yet, amid all the speculation, one fact remains undeniable. This incident has exposed cracks in the fortress of royal security and stirred emotions that haven't been felt in years. Princess Anne's injury, though reportedly minor, feels like a symbolic wound, a reminder that power, privilege, and history cannot always shield against danger. By the end of that turbulent week, Gatcombe Park stood eerily quiet again. The lawns were trimmed, the guards restored to their posts, and the media trucks had rolled away. But those who were there that night say something has changed. A lingering unease remains. A sense that the invisible wall separating royalty from reality has grown thinner. And so, as the world awaits further statements and official findings, one question continues to echo. If even Princess and one of the most disciplined and guarded royals can be caught off guard in her own home, what does that say about the safety of the crown itself? This story isn't just about an accident or a fall. It's about what happens when centuries of tradition meet the vulnerabilities of the modern world. It's about how a single night can shake the illusion of invincibility that surrounds the monarchy. And perhaps most of all, it's about a woman, strong, stoic, and human, who has once again found herself at the center of a storm she never invited. And as dawn breaks on a shaken Britain, the question remains. Will this incident lead to lasting change, or will it be quietly buried beneath the palace's polished statements and closed doors? Princess Anne has always faced the world with strength. But even strength has limits. Tonight, that truth feels closer and more haunting than ever before. The night was quiet, the kind of stillness that feels unnatural. Too calm, too poised, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The air hung heavy over the Gloucestershire countryside, and Gatcombe Park, Princess Anne's private sanctuary, rested beneath the pale glow of moonlight. Inside, most of the estate slept. Guards rotated their posts, surveillance monitors flickered softly, and the rhythmic sound of hooves could occasionally be heard from the nearby stables. Nothing suggested that within minutes, one of the most alarming breaches in royal history would unfold. It started with a shadow. A figure moved beyond the outer wall, slipping between the security lights with practiced caution. The intruder, according to early reports, was dressed in dark clothing, face obscured by a hood. Cameras caught fragments, a flicker here, a blurred outline there, but nothing clear enough to trigger immediate alarms. The first alert came not from the sensors but from a patrol guard who noticed movement in a restricted zone. He called it in, voice calm but alert. Possible contact, east perimeter, near the garden fence. What followed was a series of events so rapid and chaotic that even seasoned security officers later struggled to recall the exact sequence. Within 60 seconds, the quiet hum of the estate was shattered by the blare of alarms. Dogs barked furiously as floodlights snapped on, illuminating patches of fog and dew-slicked grass. Guards sprinted from the gatehouse, weapons drawn, while others sealed off the main drive. Inside the residence, a shrill alarm echoed through the halls. Princess Anne, who was reportedly awake and reading in her sitting room, was quickly surrounded by members of her royal protection squad. "She didn't panic," said one staff member who asked to remain anonymous. "She just looked at them and asked, 'What's going on?' Like she was about to handle it herself." That composure, characteristic of the Princess Royal, likely prevented greater chaos inside the house. Still, the speed at which events unfolded left little room for strategy. The intruder, meanwhile, had made it past the first security checkpoint. Sources close to the investigation later confirmed that a section of fencing had been deliberately cut days before, though this discovery wasn't made until after the breach. Whether this was preparation or coincidence remains under investigation. What's certain is that the individual moved with alarming precision, evading motion sensors and security beams that had been recently upgraded. Inside the control room, chaos reigned. Radio chatter filled the air as officers relayed positions. Target in motion, North Garden. Possible breach toward stables. The room was bathed in red light from emergency indicators. A duty officer attempted to lock down access points electronically, but the sudden flood of signals caused brief system delays. For a tense 30 seconds, the estate's defenses lagged behind the unfolding threat. It was during this confusion that Princess Anne was moved from her sitting room toward a secured corridor leading to a reinforced safe zone. The route was familiar, practiced in drills but never used in real danger. The princess, refusing to be carried or guided too hastily, insisted on walking. In the dim light, one of the marble steps along the hallway became slick from a recently cleaned floor. Amid the shouting and the blinding flash of emergency lights, she stumbled. Those nearest reached to steady her, but in the narrow passageway, she fell forward, her head striking the edge of a wooden doorframe. Witnesses say the sound was sharp, a moment that froze everyone around her. Everything stopped for a second, one guard later recalled. The alarms, the shouting, it all felt distant. She pushed us away, said she was fine, but we could see the mark forming immediately. Despite her insistence, security officers continued moving her toward the safe zone. The intruder, still outside, had triggered additional motion sensors near the garden pond. Police arrived within minutes, surrounding the estate's outer perimeter. A helicopter, dispatched from a nearby base, hovered low over the grounds, its searchlights slicing through the darkness. The timeline of the breach, reconstructed from security logs, lasted less than 12 minutes. 12 minutes during which every second carried the weight of uncertainty. At one point, officers reported losing visual contact with the suspect. It was then that a secondary alarm was triggered from the western side of the property. Possibly a false reading caused by the chaos, but enough to heighten fears that more than one intruder might be involved. Inside the safe room, Anne reportedly asked for updates. When informed that the suspect was still at large, she gave a single instruction: keep everyone calm. Even as medics examined the swelling on her forehead, she refused sedation or extended care, focusing instead on ensuring her staff were accounted for. Outside, the scene was surreal. Dozens of police vehicles lined the winding road leading to Gatcombe Park. Officers combed the hedges and wooded areas with torches, calling out into the mist. News of the breach had not yet reached the public, but journalists, ever alert to police radio traffic, were already gathering at nearby intersections. By the time the intruder was apprehended, roughly 500 yards from the estate's main gate, the night had descended into organized chaos. The suspect, according to early reports, was disoriented and unarmed. No motive was immediately clear. Some officers suggested the person appeared to be mentally unstable. Others weren't so sure, pointing to how precisely the security gaps were exploited. Within hours, Buckingham Palace issued its first statement. Her Royal Highness the Princess Royal experienced a minor incident involving a breach of the estate perimeter. She has sustained minor injuries and is recovering comfortably. But those who had seen the inside of Gatcombe Park that night knew the truth was more complicated. There had been fear, real, palpable fear, and for a brief moment, it had touched one of the monarchy's most steadfast figures. In the aftermath, as dawn painted the horizon, the scene inside the residence was somber. Staff cleaned shattered glass from a corridor window where a guard had collided during the rush. Security teams reviewed footage in silence, watching grainy clips frame by frame. The princess, now resting in her private quarters, had refused hospitalization until reassured that all personnel were safe. For the police and investigators, the hours that followed were critical. They cordoned off sections of the estate, collected footprints, and photographed the cut fence. Every camera feed from the past 24 hours was analyzed. What they found or didn't find raised as many questions as it answered. How had the cameras on the east perimeter gone offline moments before the intrusion? Why were no alarms triggered until the guard reported visual movement? And who had access to the control system in the days leading up to the event? Those involved in the response described the night as both chaotic and eerily quiet. "It's strange," one security official said. "You expect noise, panic? But instead there was this heavy silence after the alarms stopped. Everyone was just listening, waiting to see if it was really over." The following morning, news outlets began reporting the story with headlines that carried a mix of disbelief and concern. For most citizens, the idea that a member of the royal family could be endangered in such a way was unthinkable. For those who work in security, it was a wake-up call, a reminder that no system, however advanced, is foolproof. Princess Anne's reaction afterward remained consistent with her public image. She downplayed the incident, reportedly telling staff, "I've had worse falls on horseback." But beneath that trademark humor, those close to her saw signs of weariness. A lifetime of service had taught her resilience, but even resilience bends under pressure. The physical bruise might heal, but the psychological impact of knowing danger can breach even royal walls would linger. The night of the breach became a defining moment, an event that tested every layer of royal protection and exposed vulnerabilities few had imagined possible. It revealed the thin line between safety and chaos, between perception and reality. For a royal family already navigating modern scrutiny, it was a reminder that tradition offers no shield against the unexpected. In the hours that followed, one phrase circulated quietly among palace staff. "If it can happen here, it can happen anywhere." Those words, simple but chilling, captured the essence of the night. For centuries, royal estates had symbolized stability, order, and protection. But in that brief window of time, under the moonlight of Gloucestershire, that answer encapsulated the very essence of her character. A lifetime of service distilled into a single statement of resolve. It was not denial, but acceptance laced with defiance. She refused to be defined by fear. Yet those who watched closely noticed a softness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. A fleeting awareness that strength and vulnerability are not opposites, but partners in survival. The night she fell may have been an accident of circumstance, but what followed became a testament to endurance. Her injury was real, her recovery swift, but the message it sent, to her family, her staff, and the world, was even clearer. Even the unbreakable can be shaken, yet still stand tall. That is how the Princess Royal faced her injury. Not as a wound to conceal, but as another chapter in a life built on courage. And as Britain reflected on her ordeal, the admiration that followed was not born of pity, but of renewed respect. Because even in pain, she reminded them that dignity doesn't falter when tested. It simply adapts and carries on. The image of the intruder would come to haunt everyone involved that night. In the days that followed, authorities released no official description, no photographs, not even confirmation of the suspect's name. All that existed were fragments. Grainy stills from malfunctioning cameras, faint audio snippets of heavy breathing captured over a scrambled radio frequency, and the testimonies of guards who claimed to have seen a shadow moving with uncanny precision. It was enough to keep the public guessing, and enough to make investigators uneasy. The first reports described the individual as a man of average height, dressed entirely in black, with gloves and a hood drawn low. But the most disturbing detail wasn't his appearance, it was the way he moved. One officer said it looked rehearsed, as if he knew exactly where to step to avoid motion sensors. Another claimed he paused at certain points, as though he was waiting for cues that only an insider could know. That suggestion of foreknowledge changed the tone of the entire investigation. What had begun as a security lapse was quickly turning into a potential conspiracy. Gatcombe Park was no stranger to visitors, from maintenance crews to gardeners, delivery personnel, and local contractors. The estate, sprawling over hundreds of acres, was both private and semi-operational. Yet to reach the inner grounds where the princess resided, one had to pass through multiple layers of defense. Locked gates, camera-monitored roads, and human patrols. For the intruder to have penetrated that deep into the property, one of two things had to be true. Either they possessed extraordinary skill or someone had helped them. Within hours of the arrest, the suspect was taken into custody at a nearby police station. Officers on the scene described him as calm, almost detached. He did not resist, nor did he speak during the transfer. One detail immediately stood out. There were no identification documents, no wallet, no phone, not even keys. It was as if he had erased his identity before entering the estate. Forensic teams combed through his clothing for DNA or fibers that could link him to previous offenses. The gloves were leather, wiped clean of prints. The boots, military grade, bore faint traces of soil consistent with areas surrounding Gatcombe's northern boundary. Investigators speculated that he might have camped nearby in the days leading up to the breach. Locals later reported seeing a lone man walking along country lanes, though no one had found him suspicious at the time. The police immediately ruled out the idea of a simple burglar. There was nothing on the intruder that suggested theft, no tools, no bag, no weapon. That left a troubling list of possibilities. Espionage, obsession, or political statement. Scotland Yard assigned senior officers to the case, citing national security implications. What unsettled them most was that the intruder's movements showed familiarity not just with the terrain, but with internal timing, the exact moment when patrols shifted, when cameras rebooted, when the outer alarm cycled. That pattern pointed to one thing: inside information. In the following days, palace staff underwent interviews and background checks. Some were questioned twice. The inquiries probed deeper than ever before: bank accounts, communications, recent visitors. For many long-serving employees, it was the first time they'd felt like suspects instead of protectors. One guard confided anonymously to a journalist, "We all started doubting each other. Every glance felt like an accusation." While the police built their timeline, the media began constructing its own narrative. Headlines like "Phantom in the Garden," "Who breached the princess's sanctuary?" and "Inside job at the palace?" flooded the newsstands. Every speculation, every rumor became front-page material. Yet amid the noise, certain facts began to emerge. Firstly, investigators confirmed that a security camera near the east perimeter had been manually disabled 2 hours before the intrusion. The system logs showed a technician code entered at 10:42 p.m., a code belonging to a maintenance worker contracted through an external security firm. That man was questioned but denied any involvement, claiming his system access had been cloned. The firm later discovered that their internal network had been breached days prior. Someone, it seemed, had gone to significant lengths to prepare for this night. Secondly, a vehicle believed to belong to the suspect was found abandoned 5 miles away, concealed behind a hedgerow near a service road. It was an older model sedan, registered under a false name. Inside were maps of the Gloucestershire area, a handheld radio tuned to emergency frequencies, and a printed schedule of public royal appearances from the previous month. None of it directly connected to the night's events, but the implication was clear: the breach wasn't spontaneous. As details trickled out, so did the theories. Some suggested the intruder was a rogue protester targeting royal privilege, part of an extremist movement seeking publicity. Others whispered darker motives: revenge from a former staff member, espionage from abroad, or even a psychological fixation with the princess herself. The latter theory gained traction after investigators discovered a cache of letters addressed to Her Royal Highness and the true horsewoman found inside the suspect's temporary lodgings. The handwriting was erratic, the tone oscillating between admiration and resentment. One letter read, "You are the only one who understands discipline, and they mock you for it. I will fix it for you." Those words chilled investigators. They revealed not just obsession but intent, however delusional, to intervene in her life. Psychologists consulted by police described the profile as consistent with targeted fixation, a phenomenon where individuals form parasocial attachments to public figures, convincing themselves of personal connection or divine mission. In most cases, these obsessions remain harmless fantasies. In rare ones, they escalate into action. This appeared to be one of those rare ones. Meanwhile, the royal household maintained its silence. Palace officials refused to confirm the suspect's identity or motive. This secrecy, while standard for ongoing investigations, only fueled public speculation. Royal correspondents debated whether the intruder had been motivated by political anger, personal fixation, or sheer madness. None could answer definitively, but one thing became clear: the breach had shaken public trust in the idea of royal security as impenetrable. Behind closed doors, Anne's protection detail underwent restructuring. Personnel were rotated, command oversight tightened, and all external security contracts temporarily suspended pending audit. It was an unprecedented move, signaling the seriousness with which the palace regarded the event. Still, unanswered questions lingered. How had the suspect known when to act? Why target princess, and specifically, when higher-profile royals might have drawn more attention? And perhaps most unsettling, what had he planned to do once inside? Investigators replayed the footage over and over, studying the intruder's body language. At no point did he appear hurried or lost. He seemed to be following an invisible map, heading directly toward the residence's rear entrance. That door, though rarely used, led near the hallway where Anne had fallen. It suggested he knew the layout intimately. When questioned by psychologists after his arrest, the suspect remained silent for hours. Then, according to leaked notes, he spoke a single sentence. "I came to warn her." What that warning entailed, or from whom, he never clarified. He refused further interviews, eating little, staring blankly at the wall of his holding cell. Mental health evaluations described him as lucid but detached, showing signs of grandiose delusion. For investigators, that left a chilling paradox. If his goal was to warn, why break in at night, risking detection? If he meant no harm, why evade cameras and approach stealthily? Nothing about the behavior aligned with a benign purpose. Yet nothing about his capture indicated violent intent. He carried no weapon, made no threats, and surrendered quietly. The ambiguity unsettled everyone, from detectives to the royal family themselves. Theories multiplied faster than evidence. Some insiders speculated that the suspect might have been manipulated, a pawn in a larger test of palace security. The breach, they said, might not have been about harming but about exposing vulnerabilities ahead of future targets. That possibility brought intelligence agencies into the conversation. MI5 analysts reviewed the breach alongside cyber intrusion attempts recorded the same week against several government databases. Though no direct link was established, the coincidence raised eyebrows. Could the royal breach have been part of a coordinated probe into British institutions? If so, the implications were far-reaching. Still, others believed the answer was far simpler: a troubled man driven by delusion. That narrative was easier to digest, easier to close neatly in reports. Yet the quiet fear within official circles was that it wasn't that simple. Something about the precision, the knowledge of blind spots, felt too deliberate. As investigators worked, life inside Gatcombe Park changed subtly. The gardens once open to local charity tours were closed indefinitely. Visitors now passed through metal detectors and ID scanners. Even longtime employees were reissued security badges. Every phone call, every delivery was logged. Princess and herself, though outwardly unchanged, reportedly grew more vigilant. She insisted on briefings twice a day and refused to reduce staff, arguing that familiarity kept her grounded. Publicly, the palace presented stability. But privately, and Circle whispered that she often revisited the moment of the breach, replaying how close the intruder had come. Her fall had been an accident, but it might not have been her last brush with danger. "She thinks there's more to it," one aide admitted. "She just can't say what." Weeks after the incident, a small news outlet published an unverified claim that a second individual had been seen near the outer fence around the same time. Police denied it, but witnesses insisted. One local farmer told reporters he saw a figure by the treeline, using what looked like a flashlight. Whether this was connected remains uncertain, but it deepened the air of mystery surrounding the event. The investigation would eventually lead to a closed-door hearing, the results of which remain classified. But what emerged unofficially painted a portrait of obsession, planning, and a chilling lack of fear. Whoever the intruder was, he had walked into the heart of royal security and almost reached one of Britain's most beloved figures. The mystery lingers not because of what is known, but because of what remains concealed. Why he came, how he knew, and who, if anyone, helped him. Those answers, perhaps locked in classified files, are the shadow that still hangs over Gatcombe Park. And somewhere in the quiet countryside, the question still whispers through the mist. Was it truly over that night, or merely the beginning of something larger that the palace refuses to name? The command room at Gatcombe Park was never designed for chaos. It was built for calm efficiency, a hub of quiet vigilance where red dots blinked gently across screens representing fences, cameras, and entry gates. Normally, the room functioned like a heartbeat, steady, predictable, almost invisible to those it protected. But on the night of the breach, that heartbeat faltered. For the first time in years, the small underground space beneath the estate erupted into confusion and noise that none of its operators would ever forget. Just after midnight, the first alert came through. A motion sensor in the East Garden registered movement, then went dead. The system rebooted itself, a standard procedure that lasted only seconds. When it came back online, it showed nothing unusual. The technician on duty, a veteran named Harris, leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. The night shift was usually uneventful. Occasional foxes triggering sensors, false alarms from falling branches. But he hesitated for a moment before marking the alert as cleared. Something about the timing bothered him. Seconds later, another ping appeared, this time from a different sector of the same perimeter. Before he could react, the control panel flashed red. The silent alarms, the ones meant only for internal awareness, came alive. Unverified motion, East Quadrant, read the display. Harris pressed his earpiece and said, "Command to all units. Check Sector 3 East. Possible contact." That was when the sound of running footsteps echoed down the corridor. Two more officers burst into the command room, faces tense. "We've got visual interference on camera 12, one said. Harris switched feeds, staring at static. The screen flickered, then showed a distorted image of the garden path, blurry, almost painterly in its distortion. A figure appeared for half a second, then vanished into darkness. The radio filled with overlapping voices. "East team moving, copy that. North team standing by. Possible breach at fence line. Confirmed movement." Harris's training kicked in. He initiated Protocol Alpha, full lockdown sequence for royal protection. The gates sealed automatically, barriers rose from the drive, and all exterior lights switched to flood mode. Within moments, the estate that had been silent minutes earlier glowed like a small fortress under siege. Inside the command room, red light pulsed across every surface. The hum of electronics mixed with the clipped language of trained professionals who knew that every second mattered. Harris relayed updates to the Royal Protection Command in London. On the other end, an officer demanded constant status reports. "Has the principal been moved?" the voice asked. Harris hesitated. "Evacuation in progress," he replied, though he hadn't yet received confirmation. Above them, the estate transformed into a battleground of shadows and shouts. Guards sprinted along the gravel paths, the crunch of their boots blending with the distant wail of sirens. Dogs barked furiously, their handlers pulling at leashes. The intruder's location shifted across the map, a blur of movement triggering sensors from east to north. Then suddenly silence. For nearly a full minute, every screen froze. Then came the words no one wanted to hear. Visual lost. The air thickened with tension. Losing visual meant losing control. It meant they were blind. Harris turned to his deputy. "Check internal feeds." He might have slipped closer. The deputy, a young officer named Lewis, switched through dozens of monitors showing corridors, gardens, and staircases. The only movement visible came from palace staff being guided by security personnel. No sign of the intruder. At 12:06 a.m., the power flickered. For 2 terrifying seconds, the room plunged into darkness before backup generators restored light. Harris's voice cracked as he radioed again. "Emergency lights active. Possible tampering with grid." Later analysis would confirm that an electrical relay had been manually triggered near the eastern boundary. Evidence that the intruder understood the estate's infrastructure far better than any outsider should have. Meanwhile, the officers assigned to protect Princess and reported in. "Principal secure," came the terse update. Harris exhaled for the first time in minutes. But relief was short-lived. A secondary alarm sounded, this one from the interior corridor leading to the safe room. For a moment, panic rippled through the command team. "False positive?" someone asked. "Check sensor status," Harris ordered. The feed showed movement near the corridor where Anne and her guards were evacuating. It turned out to be one of the protective detail sprinting ahead to secure the door. But in the chaos, miscommunication spread like wildfire. An operator mistakenly reported potential breach inside. The phrase, repeated over open radio, sent shockwaves through every channel. Above ground, the response team shifted formation. Officers redirected from outer defense toward the residence, leaving brief gaps in perimeter coverage. Those few minutes would later draw criticism from higher command. But in the heat of that moment, no one cared about protocol. They were focused on the possibility of danger reaching the princess herself. Inside the command room, Harris's hands trembled as he typed in override codes. The alarm system blared continuously now, making conversation nearly impossible. Sweat dripped down his temple as he issued new orders. Lock down all service entrances. No one in or out until I confirm. The radio cracked with updates. Visual on suspect, North Side Garden. Followed by negative, lost him again. Each false sighting pulled resources in different directions. The chaos was nearly complete. At 12:10 a.m., a new voice joined the frequency. A senior commander from the Royal Protection Command in London. His tone was clipped, authoritative. This is Command 3. Maintain containment and prepare for emergency extraction if necessary. Police en route ETA 4 minutes. Harris acknowledged, his throat dry. He could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down. The fate of a royal, and by extension the reputation of the entire protection service, rested on their performance in these minutes. When word came through that the princess had fallen during evacuation, the room fell into stunned silence. Harris turned toward the operations log, eyes darting between screens. Medical on standby, he said quickly. Confirm she's conscious. The response came moments later. She's fine. Minor injury only. Relief washed through the room, but no one dared relax. By 12:14, local police sirens became audible on external microphones. The estate's outer cameras showed blue lights reflecting off mist and hedgerows. Additional security teams arrived, coordinating through overlapping channels. The intruder's last known position was traced to the northern garden, near a cluster of hedges bordering a small pond. Thermal imaging finally picked up movement. A human figure crouched low among the bushes. Target located, came the report. Moving in. Everyone in the command room held their breath. The capture took less than a minute. The suspect was subdued without resistance. As he was escorted toward the gate, Harris saw his image flicker briefly on screen, an indistinct silhouette surrounded by armed guards. When Princess and later reviewed the report, she reportedly commented, "They did their job. That's what matters." To the men and women in that underground room, those words were more than reassurance. They were redemption. But for senior officials, they were not enough. An internal audit was launched to reassess every element of the royal protection system. Behind closed doors, experts debated how the breach could have unfolded so efficiently. Some suspected a cyber compromise. Others believed the intruder had exploited human trust rather than technology. The result was the same. The illusion of perfect security had been shattered. By the time the sun rose over the fields surrounding Gatcombe Park, the command room was quiet again. The red lights had dimmed to steady green, monitors returned to their calm hum, and the staff moved with the mechanical precision of people too tired to think. But the air remained heavy, haunted by what they'd witnessed. The men who guarded a princess had seen their fortress falter, and though they'd restored order, they knew it could all happen again. Harris stepped outside into the early dawn. The sky was pale gray, the air sharp with cold. He looked toward the house, its windows still glowing faintly. Somewhere inside, the princess was resting, her cheek bandaged, her composure intact. For a brief moment he allowed himself to breathe. Then, with the quiet professionalism of a man bound by duty, he turned back toward the door. The work was far from over, because for every breach that is stopped, there is always the next one being planned, and those inside the command room now understood that better than anyone. The flashing red lights from police vehicles still cut through the darkness when the paramedics arrived at Gatcombe Park. The grounds were a scene of controlled chaos. Uniformed officers spread across the lawn, investigators photographing footprints, and security guards standing silent, their faces pale under the glare of floodlights. Amid the confusion, one priority took precedence above all others: Princess Anne's health. She had been moved to a secure room near the rear of the residence, away from windows and public view. A palace physician, summoned from Cirencester minutes after the alarm, was already at her side when the medical team arrived. The smell of antiseptic filled the air, clashing with the faint scent of polished wood. And sat upright on a sofa, her posture straight despite the growing discoloration along her cheekbone. The medics approached carefully, mindful of protocol. She waved them on impatiently. "It's just a scrape," she said. "Let's not make a fuss." But the injury was more than a scrape. Under the harsh light, it was clear the impact had left a swelling bruise across her left cheek and a shallow cut near the temple. Her protection officer, still shaken from the chaos of the evacuation, insisted she be taken to the hospital for a full examination, and resisted. "There are people still out there working," she argued, gesturing toward the window. "I'll go when they've finished." It took her physician's quiet insistence to persuade her otherwise. He reminded her that concussions often go unnoticed in the moment. She relented only after a firm but respectful appeal. "Ma'am, you're not invincible. Let us make sure you're truly well." That made her pause. Moments later, she stood, straightened her jacket, and nodded. "Very well, but I'm walking to the car." At 1:45 a.m., a convoy of 3 vehicles departed the estate under escort, the night air thick with tension. The flashing blue lights bounced off the hedgerows as the small procession wound its way down narrow country roads toward Gloucestershire Royal Hospital. The drive took less than 20 minutes but felt far longer to those inside. And sat between 2 security officers, silent, her eyes fixed on the dark road ahead. She held a small handkerchief pressed against her cheek, the white fabric already stained faintly crimson. The hospital staff had been alerted in advance. When the convoy pulled into the private entrance, a small team of doctors and nurses were waiting. The atmosphere was calm but heavy with significance. Treating a member of the royal family always carried both pressure and secrecy. The corridors were cleared, the cameras turned off, and every staff member signed confidentiality agreements on arrival. Anne's first request upon entering was simple. "No unnecessary fuss, please." She refused a wheelchair, walking briskly to the examination room with the composure of someone arriving for a routine checkup rather than an emergency visit. Her security team followed close behind, forming a discreet wall between her and the flashes of distant cameras trying to pierce the hospital's perimeter. Inside, the lead physician, a seasoned trauma specialist, conducted a thorough examination. He asked routine questions. Did she feel dizzy? Any vision changes? Headache? She answered crisply. No. Slight headache, but nothing worth writing about. When he suggested a CT scan, she sighed and agreed. If it makes you happy, do it. While doctors examined her, the corridors outside grew tense with the arrival of palace officials. The communications director, freshly roused from London, coordinated statements with Buckingham Palace. Every word would be weighed carefully. Too much detail could spark panic. Too little could fuel speculation. At 3 a.m., the official statement was released. Her Royal Highness the Princess Royal sustained minor injuries following a security incident at her residence. She has undergone medical evaluation as a precaution and is in good spirits. The phrase "in good spirits" was chosen deliberately, an echo of royal understatement, the same phrase used during earlier crises. But within the hospital, the atmosphere told a deeper story. Anne's injury, though not severe, had shaken her staff profoundly. The sight of blood on a royal uniform, the sound of confusion within palace walls, these were images none of them had ever expected to witness. After the scan, doctors confirmed there was no internal bleeding, no fracture, and no signs of neurological trauma. The bruising, however, was extensive, and the swelling would take days to subside. They applied a cold compress and recommended rest. She refused to stay overnight. "You'll have to sedate me to keep me here," she joked, managing a faint smile that barely moved her injured cheek. Her security team exchanged uneasy glances. The physician sighed, knowing persuasion would be futile. "At least let us monitor you for a few hours," he said. She agreed on the condition that she could continue reviewing documents while she waited. A nurse brought her tea and a stack of papers retrieved from her car. She spent the next hour reading, occasionally glancing at the door as if itching to leave. Meanwhile, word of the breach began to circulate through the British press. Editors scrambled to confirm details, news vans positioned themselves near the hospital, and social media filled with speculation. The palace's communications unit coordinated closely with local police to control the narrative, Any mention of attack, injury, or fall was softened to incident, precaution, and minor discomfort. Inside the hospital, those present sensed the weight of history pressing upon their ordinary routines. One nurse later told reporters anonymously, "It was surreal. You're cleaning a wound on a royal, and she's joking about having work in the morning. It made you realize how human they really are." By dawn, and was cleared for discharge. She thanked the staff personally, shaking hands with the doctors who treated her. When asked if she wanted to use a side exit to avoid cameras, she declined. "Let them see I'm fine," she said simply. As she stepped outside, a faint bandage visible beneath her scarf, the flash of cameras briefly illuminated her face. She neither flinched nor smiled, just a curt nod to the photographers before entering the car. Back at Gatcombe Park, the early light revealed the full scale of the previous night's turmoil. Muddy footprints crisscrossed the lawns, evidence markers dotted the paths, and a portion of fencing remained cordoned off. The hum of generators and the distant whir of helicopters broke the morning calm. Inside the estate, staff moved quietly, cleaning debris, whispering updates. When the convoy returned, all activity paused, and exited the car unassisted, carrying a folder under her arm. Her butler and physician tried to dissuade her from resuming work, but she ignored them. "If I sit still, they'll just worry more," she said, walking straight into her study. Within an hour, she was on the phone with senior members of her household, discussing the schedule for the week ahead. Her resilience astonished those around her. The staff had expected her to rest, to retreat from public view. Instead, she issued instructions to ensure that her upcoming charity events would continue as planned. "The worst thing we can do," she told her secretary, "is let this incident disrupt normal life." Nevertheless, precautions were heightened. Medical personnel remained on standby at the estate for 24 hours. A new round of tests was conducted later that day to monitor her recovery. Though she showed no signs of dizziness or imbalance, the discoloration around her eye deepened into a dark purple hue. When a staff member expressed concern, she replied dryly, "It'll match my riding jacket." For those close to her, the humor was both reassuring and heartbreaking. Beneath the jokes, they could see fatigue, a quiet weariness that came not from injury but from the shock of intrusion, and had spent her life maintaining composure, but the realization that danger could find her even here weighed heavily. In London, the king was briefed continuously. Advisors described him as deeply troubled, pacing his private office in Buckingham Palace. "He was furious that anyone could get that close," said one aide. "But more than that, he was frightened. This is his sister, the one person he's always seen as indestructible." Queen Camilla reportedly insisted that additional medical experts review Anne's condition. Her concern, though understated publicly, was genuine. The hospital visit, brief as it was, became a symbol of something greater than an injury. It represented vulnerability, a glimpse behind the polished facade of royal life. The tabloids, unusually respectful, refrained from intrusive speculation. Instead, headlines focused on admiration. "Princess and refuses hospital stay. Royal duty before rest." The tone reflected a collective relief that she had survived what could have been far worse. Meanwhile, the medical team that treated her remained bound by confidentiality. In private, they described her as one of the most stoic patients they'd ever encountered. "She didn't complain once," said one nurse. "Even when we cleaned the wound, she didn't flinch. She just wanted to know when she could leave." By the second day, she resumed correspondence with government officials, issuing handwritten notes of thanks to the police and paramedics who had responded. "Your professionalism and speed ensured the situation was contained quickly," one letter read. "Please extend my gratitude to all those who were on duty that night." Each signature carried the same crisp, decisive handwriting that had become her hallmark. Medical specialists continued to monitor her for aftereffects. Bruising healed slowly, but her energy returned rapidly. Those who visited said she was more concerned about the staff's morale than her own recovery. "They're blaming themselves," she told an aide. "They need to remember it could have been any of us." The hospital episode soon transitioned from emergency to reflection. For the doctors, it was a moment of history quietly lived behind closed doors. For the royal family, it was a warning, a reminder that even the most disciplined life can be interrupted by randomness. And for Anne herself, it was simply another challenge to overcome, another test of endurance in a life defined by them. She returned to her usual schedule within the week. When asked by a journalist outside an event whether she was feeling better, she replied with a small smile, "I never felt unwell." The remark, classic and in its brevity and irony, drew laughter and applause. But those who knew her best saw in her expression a flicker of something deeper, determination, yes, but also awareness. She had faced danger before, but never within the safety of her own walls. That realization, quietly acknowledged but never spoken aloud, would stay with her long after the bandages were gone. And while the world moved on, the doctors who treated her, the guards who stood watch, and the family who nearly lost her all knew one truth. That night changed something. It reminded them that even in palaces, the line between safety and vulnerability is thinner than anyone dares to admit. Princess Anne's hospital visit may have lasted only hours, but its echoes would linger for months. A silent testament to resilience, grace, and the unshakable composure of a woman who refused to be defined by fear. The palace's response came before sunrise, measured and deliberate, crafted with the precision of 1,000 crises before it. The first draft of the statement had been prepared in the early hours by the communications office under Buckingham Palace, waiting only for final approval from the king. By dawn, as news outlets scrambled to confirm the story, the official press release was transmitted through the Royal Press Association. The language was calm, structured, and understated, yet every syllable carried weight. Her Royal Highness the Princess Royal sustained minor injuries following a security incident at her residence, Gatcombe Park. She has been treated as a precaution and remains in good spirits. Investigations into the incident are ongoing. The royal family thanks the emergency services for their swift and professional response. It was the kind of statement that said everything and nothing at once. The palace had perfected this art, acknowledging just enough to satisfy the public's right to know while concealing the tremors of fear beneath the surface. But behind those carefully chosen words, the atmosphere within Buckingham Palace was anything but composed. At 6 a.m., the King's private secretary convened an emergency meeting in the Green Drawing Room. Senior advisors, security coordinators, and press officers assembled around the long oak table, their faces drawn from lack of sleep. The king, visibly tense, sat at the head, reading the preliminary reports with his glasses perched low on his nose. The silence was thick. "Was she targeted?" he asked finally, his voice quiet but sharp. The head of royal protection hesitated before answering. "At this stage, sir, we can't rule it out." The king's jaw tightened. "Then rule it out quickly," he said, closing the folder. "We cannot afford uncertainty. Not now." His words revealed the broader anxiety that the palace now faced, not merely concern for Anne, but for the image of stability that the monarchy depends upon. A breach of security at any royal residence, especially one resulting in injury, had the potential to ripple across every level of public perception. The king's advisors understood this immediately. A single phrase mishandled, a single rumor left unchecked, could erode confidence not only in security but in leadership itself. The director of communications outlined the media strategy. "We use the phrase incident, not attack. We emphasize Her Royal Highness's resilience and recovery. We avoid speculation about motives until we have verified information." He glanced toward the king. "Sir, if you're comfortable, we recommend a brief comment from you later today, perhaps after the Privy Council meeting." The king nodded slowly. "Make it clear she's all right. The country needs to hear that." Outside, the world was already awake to the story. News anchors used restrained tones, yet the undertone of alarm was unmistakable. "A rare breach of royal security," one presenter said gravely. "Sources confirm that Princess Anne sustained minor injuries while being escorted to safety." Across social media, speculation flourished. Some users questioned how an intruder could have reached the estate's inner grounds. Others expressed sympathy for the princess, recalling her decades of unbroken service. The palace communications office worked tirelessly to manage the storm. Every journalist's inquiry was filtered, every response cross-checked. The royal press secretary issued quiet briefings to major networks, reminding them to respect the family's privacy and avoid conjecture. It was a phrase often repeated during royal turbulence, but this time the tone behind it carried a tremor of unease. Within hours, the first television images of Gatcombe Park appeared. Police tape fluttering in the breeze, officers pacing near the gates, and flashing lights still visible in the early morning haze. Helicopters hovered overhead, their cameras zooming in on any movement. A reporter shouted questions at a uniformed officer. "Is Princess and seriously injured? Was the intruder armed?" The officer responded with the standard refrain, "No comment while investigations are ongoing." By midday, a second palace statement was released. This one carried the king's signature touch, formal yet personal. His Majesty the King has spoken with his sister, the Princess Royal, following the incident at Gatcombe Park. Her Majesty and the Queen Consort are relieved to hear that she is recovering and remain grateful to those who ensured her safety. The royal household has full confidence in the ongoing investigation. That message was designed to do three things: reassure the public that Anne was well, signal royal unity, and convey authority. It succeeded on the surface, but among palace insiders, the undercurrent of tension remained palpable. Every staff member understood what wasn't being said, that the monarchy had been caught unprepared. Behind the polished marble of Buckingham Palace, discussions turned from press strategy to prevention. The King's Private Security Council reviewed contingency protocols, and for the first time in decades, questions arose about whether royal residences had grown complacent. "We rely too much on tradition," one senior advisor admitted. "Technology has advanced, threats have evolved, but some of our procedures haven't." The king's frustration simmered beneath his composed exterior. "This family has endured assassinations, intrusions, betrayals," he said, his voice low. "We learn from each one, and yet somehow it happens again. We cannot keep reacting, we must anticipate." Those words, overheard by aides, became the unofficial mandate for what would follow: a complete overhaul of royal security practices. Meanwhile, the statement from Buckingham Palace reverberated beyond Britain's borders. International outlets picked up the story, framing it as both alarming and emblematic of a changing era. In Paris, Le Monde wrote, "Even the most traditional monarchy faces the vulnerabilities of the modern world." In Washington, CNN's coverage emphasized Anne's resilience, describing her as the stoic heart of the royal family. Inside the palace, phones rang without pause. Foreign dignitaries sent messages of concern. The Japanese ambassador, a personal acquaintance of the princess, wrote expressing sympathy and admiration for her unwavering composure. Messages also arrived from within the Commonwealth, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, all expressing solidarity. Every communication was catalogued, responded to, and logged under the heading Gatcombe Incident.